Hi, welcome to Revive Ministry Podcast. Today we continue the discussion on holding on to hope, tribute to National Suicide Prevention Week and Recovery Month. I have a new guest named Shonah Marie, and I'm so excited to have her and share her insight with us. Before we begin, I want to share that Shonah is it's okay. Shonah is author of Steady in the Storm, a memoir of what it was like for her to grow up as a sheltered Christian, to then be thrown in chaos with a newlywed that is an alcoholic. I can imagine how the shift and the adjustments one must make when this is all happening. I'm really excited. I want to share that the book is available in paperback and as a Kindle version. I want to share also to those who are listening, there's a disclaimer for those who are in crisis and are seeking help. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is a good resource. It's 1-800-273-8255. I encourage all those listening all over around the world just to find what available is for a resource. I apologize. There's an alarm going on. I'm going to turn it off real quick. 1 second. Thank you. Anyway, I just want to say thank you. I don't minimize anyone coming on this podcast because a lot of times we talk about things that are hard to talk about. So I always start with quotes because, I know that people have said things better or wrote things better than I have. So I want to just start the conversation by beginning with Napoleon Bonaparte and him saying, courage isn't having the strength to go on. It's going on when you don't have the strength. What comes to mind when you hear this quote, Shonah?
Yeah, I think it's an incredible quote, and I think what comes to mind when I hear that is I liken it to the idea of it's really easy to be grateful when times are good.
Yeah.
It's really easy to be thankful when there's like good things happening all around you. And likewise, it's easy to say you have courage when you aren't faced with something challenging.
Yeah.
It's our trials and our hardships that really produce courage. So courage is not a needed resource unless you're doing something that really frightens you or scares you or pushes you to your limitations. And the very definition of courage is to do something that frightens us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just like gratitude is easy when it's good and hard when it's not good. Courage, It's easy to say you're courageous until you're faced with something that really challenges that courage within you. And I think too, from an outside perspective, when you're being courageous, it doesn't feel courageous because you're usually swimming in a lot of like fear and anxiety and worry. And so it's usually other people who tell you like, wow, like you have a lot of courage or you're being courageous. And you're kind of like, what? Like, no, like I'm terrified right now.
Yeah. I like how you say, the courage is not like we have all the chips stacked in our favor.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends would say, life sometimes is like playing a bad hand well. You know what I mean? Like that's sometimes how it is. And sometimes we wake up in the morning. Well, at the end of the day, you'll be like, I didn't go well today. Let me try again tomorrow. And that could be courageous in itself. So I really appreciate that perspective. And when we think about courage and strength, we love the underdogs for some reason. A football season starting, and a lot of times we will go for the ones that are least likely to win because it's there's a lot of inspiration when that happens. When things are stacked against you, strength and how we view it has shown me personally that you could kind of see where your value is. And on the same line, when you're talking about courage and all the pain and things that we may go through, a lot of growth happens at that point too. Little growth happens when you're kind of, like you said, everything's going well. I'm having a great time. It doesn't challenge us to move or even address anything that's there. I want to ask you in regards to your life, if you would like to share. It says, what ways have helped you move past uncertainty? We're all in uncertainty with the last year and a half with COVID,
Yes.
and how that has changed the aspect of connecting and our dynamic in our relationships, not even just today.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much uncertainty right now. And I think that's another reason why underdogs have so much courage is because they're moving into uncertain things. They're moving into realms that are pushing them and stretching them. And uncertainty really does stretch us. And I would say that I worked really hard my whole life to make sure I didn't have uncertainty, that
Mm-hmm.
everything was like predictable and
Mm-hmm.
safe and within my realm of control. And so I used to actually chase certainty and security. So when I think
Mm-hmm.
of uncertainty in my life, it usually is something that came unexpectedly because I worked hard to make sure that I knew it was coming. So to create that security, I looked to all kinds of things like family and finances and my marriage and my job, among like many other things, including myself, to find that certainty. But what I actually found is that all of these things, they eventually fail you, and it may sound really morbid, but it's
Mm-hmm.
true. And from what I've known and what I've lived through, my certainty and our certainty, it cannot be placed on something worldly, whether it be possessions or people,
Yeah.
because it wanes and moves and grows and changes, and it's not steadfast. And the only way to move past uncertainty in life is to really rely on something that is certain and constant.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's the God of my faith.
Yeah.
And he is the only certainty in times of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And trusting his goodness and will is the only thing that will ever give me true peace in times of uncertainty, moving me through those uncomfortable periods.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned change. There's always constantly change in our lives, whether good or bad. It's stressful. A lot of times change is inevitable. Albert Einstein said that the true intelligence is the ability or to adapt to change. We have to, and I do like how you brought up faith, because it is the one constant, at least in Christianity, just like you. I look at God as the one constant that doesn't change. I have relationships around me that change, my parents, everything. It's not all
Mhm.
bad. It's just people change,
They
priorities
do.
change, and I feel that it's not all bad, but it is comforting and the very base level. That's something that I could hold on to, steadfast. Later on, like I always kind of urge those who are in recovery, those who I work with personally, to know what your purpose, like what is your why. It can't just be I'm not going to drink today. I'm not going to drink today. It has to be not a bunch of shouldn'ts. I shouldn't do
Mhm.
this. It has to be. I find that it's more like you say, more constant, more consistent when you are actively participating in your
Yes.
recovery, when you're actively participating in your faith, in that realm. When you just kind of sit there and just get complacent, it can be very toxic on how you view certainty and the aspects of life. And speaking of life, this month is Suicide Prevention Week, and it just happened. September 10th is World Suicide Day, and I just for me, a lot of times in the context of you see Romeo and Juliet, you're like, I'll die for you. It's not the right context, because I like this quote. It says, if you want to show me you really love me, don't say you would die for me. Instead, stay alive for me.
Hmm.
There's a lot of context, and me, I'm a veteran myself. I was in the Air Force during 9/11, which is past, and I just remember there's people who lost their lives, who fought courageously, and I salute them. But at the same time, it's not the same context. A lot of times, when it comes to suicide, it is messy. It's hard to talk about, but staying alive, a lot of times, there's a lot of courage in that, especially what's going on with a lot of people and what their struggles are. And I want to ask you a question to kind of get this moving in respect of this topic, is
Mhm.
listening to this quote. The quote we said before, this one right here. Reflect on your own life. What sticks out regarding living for me in this context versus dying for me?
Yeah, this when I first read this quote in your show notes here, it really actually quite hit me, and it means a great deal to me when I think back on my story and my husband's story. So, in my book called Steady in the Storm,
Hmm.
I walk the reader through what it was like to walk with my husband through his relapse and treatment and recovery. And I'd grown up as a pretty sheltered Christian, and I didn't even really know what it meant to be an alcoholic, to be honest with you.
Hmm.
And my husband had struggled with addiction on and off his whole life, and so this was something he was, been around the mountain with a million times and kind of knew the ins and outs, and I was like brand new and had no idea. And it was a really hard and messy journey for me. And at one point in the journey, things got so dark that, my husband, I'd kicked him out of the house and we were separated. And I thought, our marriage is done. This is it. And he was just in a really dark place. And he did have to fight for his life, to stay alive for himself and me, instead of choosing the easy way out, because to him, it just felt really dark and hopeless. And it did for me too. I was like, well, like, where do we even go from here? And he chose to fight, and he did fight, and he ended up going to treatment. And our lives are a 180-degree difference today than it was in those years. And that is, it's just the most incredible gift to say to someone like, I will stay here. I will exist in my trauma and exist in my pain and fight through it in order to have the life that you and I dreamed about, instead of saying like, this is too hard and, I'm out and I'm done. And it's an incredible gift to give someone.
Hmm.
And yeah, being Recovery Month and Suicide Prevention Week, even with COVID and what have you, like, where I live, our overdose and suicide rates far outweigh our COVID deaths. And
Yeah.
life is just hard. It's hard, and people crack and crumble, and they break, and they don't have any way out. And, living is just too painful. But to choose to move through that uncertainty and
Hmm.
move through that pain is
Hmm.
actually just, it's a way bigger gift and such a courageous thing to do.
Hmm.
And I say that having watched my husband choose that gift.
Yeah, and staying and choosing life is courageous. I just want to share with those listening and watching that perspective can make the permanent choice seem more appealing. It's not that they want to leave their friends and family a lot of times. It's the pain is real. I want to share briefly, if you are in crisis in the United States, do not hesitate to call 1-800-273-8255, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, or seek out whatever resources there. Support looks different. It could be a community, it could be a church family. The healthy support comes in different ways. Suicide, like, as we're speaking, is hard for many of
Mm-hmm.
us to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Recovery, even with a hope aspect, usually is not talked about
Yeah.
because of how messy it can be. We want cures, we want quick fixes.
Yes.
And I was reading this book about everyone has it. I just like this interesting thought. It said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. I thought that was interesting.
Mm.
I do feel we ask sometimes the wrong questions. You shouldn't do this. Why are you doing this? More, what happened?
Hmm.
And like a lot of times in recovery, you go through that journey. Um, Shonah, Shonah, I want to ask you: could you share what helped you when you holding on to hope, and what would you like to share with the listeners about? You shared a lot, but anything else you want to fill in regards to the concept? This month is holding on to hope. We talk about uncertainty. You can't have certainty and hope together. You have to have, like, there won't be a need for hope if we knew what was to
Mm-hmm.
come. So what would you like to add that you haven't already so far?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually just did an Instagram live the other day about hope, and I forgot that we were talking about hope today. And so hope has like clearly been very heavy on me lately. And
Mm,
um, hope is a really hard topic. And one I could actually talk about for a very long time, and I won't, to respect our time. But firstly, I want to say that it's not easy. And I had a counselor tell me once that hope was very expensive for me, meaning that it cost me a lot, like mentally, physically, and spiritually, to hold on to hope, as there was no guarantee that my husband would recover from his addiction and that our marriage would make it. And it was really relieving for me to hear that hope was not free, that it did cost, because I felt like I was a failure if I didn't have this like beautiful, like innocent belief in hope. For me, hope cannot be found in like any one person or inside of yourself, as I kind of touched on before with uncertainty. It has to be rooted in something like unchanging and continually reliable and trustworthy and good. And for me, again, that's Creator God. And holding on to God and His promises and His path for my life and my husband's life and His goodness, that's the only thing that allowed me to believe hope was even possible, let alone hold on to it for myself. Like I would have to tell myself that like, I don't hope in my husband. I don't hope in his recovery. I don't actually hope that our marriage would make it, but I hope in the fact that God is good and His plans for us are good. And that no matter how this turns out, like it's going to be okay. And, thankfully in God's goodness, like we got all of it in the end, like we got my husband's recovery and he's still walking out his recovery and sobriety, and we have our marriage and we have the goodness of God. And that to me is like, I guess the main thing I want people to hear is like, if you're struggling with hope, yes, obviously hope is hard and you're not doing it wrong because you're struggling with hope. And hope is really hard, but it is there, and it's a gift if you want it.
I read a book from Viktor Frankl. He was a Jew during the Holocaust, and he was a psychiatrist. He made notes on who actually survived during that horrible situation the Jewish people who were in prison in those camps were. And he said the people, when they knew the why in their life, the how got not easier, bearable. Like the way people had hope, the people who could look past the tunnel and past where they were at this present time, those are the ones who usually, and that kind of leads me to this quick question to you is, briefly, what is your why when it comes to this topic? Why do you do what you do? Why does it matter? I know you mentioned a lot of obvious reasons, but sometimes it's good to kind of reflect and moving forward. And I think knowing the why in recovery, or as you're helping your husband and as a spouse, what is your why when it comes to this topic?
I think firstly, we have to acknowledge that, our journey to recovery, whether it be through addiction or, like I'm not an addict, but in Al-Anon, we talk about recovery from our need to control, right? Our need to have that predictable and safe environment and know what's coming. And that journey of recovery is going to be your whole life. Like it will be, there is no like, oh, I'm done. I made it now. Like we finished, and I think my why needs to be built up in that understanding that this is a lifelong journey. And for me, it'll always come back to that original purpose of that we were created to be, blameless and perfect before God. And we were created to worship Him and dwell in harmony with Him. And obviously, the fall of man and sin and that whole long story, ever since then, we've struggled to find our way back to God. And for me, like every aspect of life is an opportunity to find my way back to God and to find my way out of my brokenness and back to His perfection, His peace and His path for our lives. And so whether it be, the uncertainty of my husband's addiction or the uncertainty of COVID or whatever it is, it's all an opportunity for us to work through our brokenness and work through the areas where we lack God and allow Him to bring restoration to us.
Yeah, I when it comes to why do I do what I do, or why do I have a podcast that I each week talking to different people about some of the saddest things, some of the most tragic things. Why? Because of the people. That's what comes to me. Like I I'm faith-based. God is my foundation. All right. I
Mm-hmm.
do not proselytize in this because it's a pure outreach, but at the same time, I do encourage purpose-driven recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Has to be something that you have something foundational. And I do like what you're saying in that hope is not just, it's something that, this idea that we are always looking to obtain something in life, but instead of becoming something. And
Right.
the one thing about the journey of recovery and journey in life is allows us the room to heal because we continue to become something else. I
Mm-hmm.
remember this one quote, and this is just something that just came up to me, was from Lao Tzu, and he said, "Do the difficult things while they're easy, and do the great things while they are small. A journey 1,000 miles must begin with a single step." It's interesting, and also Maya Angelou, she said, and I love what she says. I'm not going to put it on the screen, but she says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said,
Mm.
people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel."
Totally. I think
Yeah,
that's such a big thing, like, because you said that, like, it's not sobriety, it's community.
yeah,
And I think, like, that journey of, like, walking each other through our brokenness and being with each other and, like, aiding each other in that journey back to wholeness is,
yeah.
like, the whole point.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We're supposed to be connective, if we're in the faith, if you look in the Bible, we're connected beings. We're supposed to be there connecting, and it's not, that one during the Good Samaritan, the
Mhm.
lawyer says, then who is my neighbor? It's everyone.
Everyone.
It's very kind of sobering when we kind of look at just the question before he does the parable. But who is our neighbors? Every single person. And that's why these things matter, because it's the families and friends that are family and friends that are not here anymore, because of this. So I do really, I'm grateful for people like you who come on and continue the discussion. That's all the point is. It's not about getting it right the first time. It's about sharing a safe space so we can talk about these things, so the dialogue keeps happening. I want to
Mhm.
ask you real quick, as we wrap up, is there any final thoughts you would like to share with those listening today?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on this earlier, but I just want to reiterate that, if you're struggling with hope, I just want to say I get it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and again, just because you're struggling with finding hope doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean uh that hope isn't there for
Yeah.
you. And God is with you and he's not abandoned you in your situation, and hope is to be found in his goodness in your life. And no matter what your situation is, whether you're the addict or the family member of the addict,
Mm-hmm.
hope it's there,
Yeah.
and it's to be found.
Yeah. Like this, I remember hearing, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
The idea is, um, it's normalizing emotions. We're emotional beings. There's one saying, emotions are great indicators, not great masters. They're good indicators of where we're at, but they're
Yeah.
not great masters. But at the same time, in the journey of recovery, having these safe places, having this support, your spouse, your friends, your community, your church, is very important.
Yes.
And part of that is being able to make a mistake. Sometimes
100%.
sometimes you do make mistakes, and it's when you are able to have that safe place where a lot of times some growth happens, because it's really not about getting it right the first time, because we know, like we talked about, it's a journey, and sometimes people process things later.
Hmm.
We may look at them and like, oh, why don't they know that? I know that, but that is not being. You understand that everyone has their own context. Like when I look at each individual, as a church leader, like when I'm at my church setting, or when I'm with people in my community, when I'm working with with people who are struggling with mental health or substance use, I understand that maybe I say to myself, and this is what's been helpful, if they refuse treatment, let's say they refuse, I would say maybe not yet. I
Mm.
keep that hope, because it's not about me at all. It's never
Hmm.
about me. All of us play a part, and I want to say thank you again so much for your insight today. Once again, Shonah Marie she's an author of Steady in the Storm, a memoir documenting the journey that she's been talking briefly about alongside her husband through his addiction, relapse, treatment, and the recovery. There's a non-contemplative, contemplative, planning, action, and maintaining. A lot of times you're in the maintaining, and then you go back to planning because what happens? Life events, things happen, but it does not change the value of you. You're still you. You know what I mean? We're still going on this trip together. I want to also share that you can purchase her book on Amazon paperback and also in the Kindle version. You can also find her on the blog, and the information's on here, but I will put it in the notes for those who are watching, also in the audio version in the podcast. Thank you, Shonah.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sorry for a little technical difficulties.
That's okay. We made it.
We made it.
Podcasting.
Anyway, I just want to share with those also, if you want to stay updated with Rhyme Ministries, various platforms, the website's obviously the most centralized, but I also want to share that we're on Facebook, on Instagram, and also on YouTube. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries, leaving with the last quote from Nelson Mandela: "May our choices reflect our hopes, not our fears."